So this took place back in 2017 in the summertime. Now, a high school student named Ryan Yen Vanderjaz, he was a cool guy, and he was a pretty good student, had all straight A's, etc. Since he was going to be entering his final year of high school in the fall, he was taking his time in the summertime going on camping, hiking, fishing, etc. Most of the time he would go with his friends or with his dad, of course. However, Ryan decided to go hiking by himself since he knew the woods very well and his parents finally can trust him to go alone in the woods. Ryan had been hiking for hours one day when he stumbled across a campsite around closer to the time when nightfall was about to approach. The sun was setting, so he saw the campsite and thought it was odd. There was no one out there, such as no dogs, no hunters, etc. He thought that maybe somebody might have left their campsite or something, so he decided to stop by to rest for a little bit. But as soon as he stepped foot into the area, he felt uneasy. He felt as if was being watched. He couldn't see anybody, but upon seeing more of what happened, he ended up looking around but couldn't find anyone or anything that could be belonging to the campsite. He cautiously looked around to make sure the site was deserted, but as soon as he was about to call it a night or something, he soon heard faint and quick footsteps that seemed to be coming from the direction of where he was standing. He then heard a few more footsteps following the first one and suddenly felt a chill down his spine. Ryan didn't want to stick around to find out who had been following him or who or what was coming, so he quickly left the campsite by getting his stuff. He eventually went down the same path where he came from and eventually got back onto his truck, where he ended up driving and speeding off into the night. He ended up getting back to his house and never went hiking alone since that day. He was just paranoid that whoever was following him in the woods or whatever was in the woods of the campsite he was in had followed him home, but thankfully that never became the case. When Ryan awoke the next day, he turned on the morning news, only to find out that a couple had been murdered in the very same campsite that he had stopped for the night before. The couple had been murdered, as the report detailed that two men attacked a couple while they were camping, stabbing them both to death. The police, on the other hand, were on search for the killers, but Ryan was just grateful that he had managed to escape death. He still to this day, he does not know who those men were and what they wanted, but whatever the intention they had was not good. Now, Ryan had no idea what would have happened to him if he stuck around any longer, and of course, he doesn't plan to return to that campsite to find out. So, this happened to Emily about maybe 10 years ago. She, at the time, was around 12 years old, and she was home alone. Well, not really 12 years old, but she was 13, like just turned 13 a day or two ago. I can't exactly remember when this took place, but Emily was around 12 or 13. She had been home alone as she was studying for her upcoming tests at school, while both of her parents were at work. Most of them do night shifts, but they both got called in to do day shifts, so this was around the time when Emily was at home. As she was looking for the contents of her room, she was listening to music when she suddenly heard a strange scratching sound coming from the basement. At first, she thought that it could have been maybe her cat or something, so she never expected to hear a sound like that so late in the night, but her cats were asleep. Worried and cautious and curious as well, Emily decided to go and investigate the source of the noise, thinking the cats might have wandered down in the basement. Creeping downstairs, Emily's fear began to grow as she reached to the bottom of the staircase, only to find the scratch door to the basement open. This was strange, as she couldn't remember if she had it open or not. With shaky hands, she turned on the light to the switch under basement. When she opened the basement door up, nobody was in the room. The feeling of dread only increased as she took some few vital steps into the darkness. Somehow, the light switch didn't seem to turn the lights back on when it went out, so it might have been maybe due to the busted bulb. Emily's breathing was short and shallow when she noticed some small personal items that didn't belong to her family. Then, to her amazement, she heard a faint sound coming from the hall. Suddenly, even more horrified, Emily saw a figurehead coming towards her. It was a man. He had been living in the basement, unbeknownst to Emily and her parents or anyone else that lived in the house. He had been using this as shelter, passed off as a storage room. He didn't look so dangerous, even though he looked like he was in his mid-50s. Emily was still scared. Thankfully, she was able to take a step back and made a run for it, screaming at the top of her lungs for help. She had escaped from the man living in the basement, but of course she ended up going to her neighbor's house, where she ended up telling them about it, and the neighbors had offered to call the police. When they called the police and they arrived, they searched everywhere for the man, but they didn't seem to find him anywhere. They looked everywhere all over the room, but couldn't find him. It still scares Emily to this day that no one knows how he managed to stay hidden for so long in her house. Not even her parents know exactly how did he manage to get in. That still really terrifies them, but also confuses them to this day, as how could he be in when pretty much everything was closed? That really still sticks with her to this day. So this happened to Christina, I believe, sometime in 2008 or something. She was in her teens, but of course, that was when everything was going on. So she was in college at the time, but however, though, she was living with her boyfriend in the countryside. Living in the countryside by herself felt like an eternity. She'd been living there since 2008. One incident she did have was somehow how some men who had broken into her property tried to break in the house, but were busted as she called the cops. That was one incident that happened to her in 2008. This happened in 2018, and of course, this was when something that she never expected to happen. It felt inexplainable, but the events started to take place at the time. She brushed most of them off as her imagination, or the occasional sounds of wildlife outside her home, which she does tend to see that. However, though, while her boyfriend was away, a that night, she woke up to a sound of a voice that didn't belong. It sounded like her boyfriend's voice calling out to her from outside. Instinct took over, and Christina quickly grabbed her flashlight and peered out in the window from her bedroom. What she saw was not her boyfriend. It was some kind of creature hovering above her garden. It was huge, with scales and wings and growing eyes. Her boyfriend's voice kept speaking. Christina? Christina, where are you? It said. She was shaking with terror as the creature slowly descended towards the back door, which luckily she had it locked. It was when the Christina noticed something odd about the creature. Whatever it was barely had a physical form. It seemed to be faint, almost mist-like being, and it was somewhat struggling to stay together in the form of what she was seeing. Christina realized that this creature was nothing that she'd ever known before. But of course, she looked over to see that Christina couldn't have any idea what to do. Of course, she could only stare at the helpless creature, although the creature didn't seem to notice her. It continued to hover around her house. She was too even scared to go do anything or had ward off. Eventually, whatever this creature was seemed to have disappeared into the woods at night, and she barely got enough sleep. Christina was relieved, but she was also shaken from the incident the next morning, and she stayed inside for the whole duration of her boyfriend being far away from home, only went out if she had to go to the store. When her boyfriend returned, she had told him what happened. He understood the gravity of the situation. They took exactly every precaution to make sure it never happened again. They were thankful to have made it unscathed. Of of course, since that night, Christina does have paranoia, thinking that there was something out there. When she told her boyfriend all the what she saw and what it looked like, of course, her boyfriend explained that it was a skinwalker. Now, keep in mind she was in Nevada at the time. They were typically found in Native American folklore, as skinwalkers have a typical being of negative energy, and it somehow found its way to her home that night. Of course, it would take on any form to try to lure people outside. Of course, Christina still has to double check everything before she goes to bed, thinking that the skinwalker could come back. Still, since that day, she had never seen that creature again, and she's not even sure what it had its plans ready for her, but she doesn't want to find out.